Early last month, I was flown out to Santa Monica, California by Private Division and Obsidian to play roughly 2 hours of The Outer Worlds, the up-and-coming RPG from Obsidian. Full disclosure around this, I had my flight and hotel paid for by them, and in addition, I got this pretty cool plushie, so although I'd like to say I remain pretty unbiased in this interview, I'm not required to say one thing or another. That is all pretty important to keep in mind when looking at my opinions on the game. And more or less in this video, I'm just gonna talk about what I thought. Right now on my channel, I uploaded the full hour and 20 minutes or so of gameplay that I was able to record and take back with me. There's no commentary or voiceover if you just want to see somebody playing The Outer Worlds for roughly 1 hour. I would recommend that video. But in this video, I'll go over my impressions, what I thought of the game, and some opinions I have on it. So one of the first big things I do want to talk about, because I think it really shapes this experience, is what actually went on here. During this event, there was actually 2 separate segments. First, for 45 minutes, we got to play the intro of the game. We created a character and then went through some of the initial quests. So although I did that, I wasn't A, allowed to record it, and B, I'm not actually allowed to talk about that. They describe how they actually want to save that segment of the game for all of you when you actually get to play it. But then after those first 45 minutes, we were switched over to a kind of medium level character. This character was very neutral. It wasn't like we had strong opinions or reputations with one faction or another. We had a decent assortment of weapons, a bunch of ammo on us, and our stats were pretty evenly ranked up, except for the leadership skill, which we did have a bit more of. We also did have 2 companions with us. On the save and on this world, we could do pretty much anything. Choose whatever quest, just go full guns blazing, or actually just go full talking to everyone. The one restriction we had was we actually had to stay on Monarch. Monarch is one of the 2 major planets in the Outer Worlds. This one is more of kind of an open world, but it's also the planet colonization failed on. There's a secondary planet that you've seen a lot more of in some of the trailers, and is quite a bit more colonized, but I didn't really get to experience that, and I can't really talk about that. So my gameplay impressions for the purposes of this video are focused around this planet. So there's actually a lot that stood out to me from this game. Some of it good, some of it not so good, but I would say one of the first things I noticed about The Outer Worlds was actually how good it looked. Now, I never thought this was going to be a bad looking game, but going from some of the gameplay trailers we've seen in the past to actually playing the game myself, I thought the graphics and the visuals were actually quite a bit better. Even just talking to other NPCs looked better than I thought it would. Now, I still don't think this is going to be a game winning visual awards, but it certainly never took away from the gameplay, and on several occasions I actually stopped to kind of just take it all in, because this planet in particular looked pretty cool. But outside of that, I'm sure one of the really big questions people had around this game was, how did the dialogue and choice feel? I know that's one of the game's most anticipated components, and well, put simply, pretty good. There was always a lot in the way of dialogue options, and it wasn't those kind of short answers or kind of throwaway questions. A lot of the times when talking to other NPCs, I felt like the question I was thinking of in my head was there. I could ask it. You often had a way to actually go a bit of a shorter route if you just wanted to talk really quickly and then get on with the gameplay. But if you really wanted to dig, if you wanted to find out the backstory of some of the various factions or inquire just a little bit further to maybe get a few more dialogue options, you normally could. In some of the various interviews around this game, we've been hearing about how the dialogue was funny, or they were trying to incorporate humor into it, and that was definitely present. There were several times where I literally laughed out loud at what I read or what was spoken to me. And although I wouldn't say it's a funny game overall, it definitely has its moments, and I totally understand why they were describing it that way. Also, a pretty cool mechanic that was present here was almost a 4-way dialogue, if you will. This is definitely in some other games also, but let's say me and my companion walk up to 2 other people that are conversing, you'll have almost a 4-way conversation. You're the focal point of it, typically talking to one other NPC, but then sometimes your companion will interject or even start off the conversation, and then other times you're going to switch between the one main NPC you were talking to the other NPC and have the conversation mostly with them with their own dialogue choices. This felt very natural and fluid, and it was actually a pretty cool mechanic that I'm excited to see more of. And for those of you wondering around speech checks, there are actually a lot of them in this game, and actually quite a bit of variety. Out of all the various speech checks I saw, more times than not, you actually had more than one option. Take for example here, where I could either choose to lie to this person using my lie skill, I could try and persuade them using a totally separate skill, or hey, maybe I'm not good at speech in general and I just want to bribe them with some of the money I have on me. And you could definitely tell while playing this game, the developers wanted to put an emphasis on you having choice, different ways to go through the same quests, and even though I only did 2-3 quests, all part of the same kind of quest line, one leading into another, there were definitely quite a few choices presented to me. I was mainly doing quests for this faction known as the Icon Lass. They are one of the few factions to actually successfully set up a base and have a presence on this unterraformed planet, and that played a big part of their culture. They felt like they were free from control of the board, they were seeing things clearly while many others were under the spell popular guys of the board, while these guys weren't. They had a very philosophical and kind of religious backing, and it was all around a pretty interesting faction. Through dialogue choices, you could learn quite a bit about their culture, and it had me genuinely interested. If all the factions have this much backstory or this unique of a feel, then I'm definitely excited to meet more of them. But in this faction, there were two kind of co-leaders, although one certainly thought he was the leader more so than the other. So for some of the initial quests, you could choose one option to appease one of the leaders or a separate one to appease the other leader. And on some of these subsequent quests, one of the leaders would ask me to go somewhere, and the other one was like, well, can you also please do this thing on the way? You had all these little choices building up throughout some of the various quests, and even though I never actually got to the finale of this, what it felt like was happening was I was building a relationship with one side over the other, and it would give me the option to actually create a divide between these two and really create one main leader and betray the other one. That's pure speculation, but these quests and options that were given to me certainly felt impactful. Like the NPCs were slowly reacting to what I was doing and the choices I was making. As far as the quests overall go, they were pretty much what you would expect. Go here and do this thing, or go here and save these people. A lot of the times I felt like the quests were carried by the dialogue, like that would oftentimes be one of the most interesting parts. And although I would say the quests I did didn't feel the most interesting, the larger story I was creating, that with building a reputation with this faction, did really interest me. Like at one stage I had to go and find this printing press and find out about a certain squad along the way. The actual finding of the printing press wasn't super impactful, I just kind of wanted to get it done, but I was super excited to go back to the faction and see how they would react, what kind of additional interactions I would be able to have as a result of that. And even just from my playing, I could see how there were several additional options kind of coming up on the horizon and decisions I would have to make that would probably have a fairly large impact. In some of the marketing and promotion of this game, there was a fairly large emphasis on choice, and playing it definitely holds up. And it wasn't just throwaway choice, it felt like choices that would be somewhat hard to make and actually change components of the game. But in my fairly limited hour to an hour and a half of playing this, I couldn't actually see the end result, but you could feel that it was coming. That was definitely one of the biggest and my favorite aspects of this game, but one of the other things that really stood out to me was just the polish of the game. This naturally isn't the final build of the game, but it felt pretty damn close. There's a lot of even minor features I noticed that made me feel like somebody had played this game and added in things that you would typically want from like a quality of life mod, except in the Outer Worlds, it was just there to begin with. Minor things like when an NPC is talking to you, once they actually get to their final line, all of your dialogue choices will actually pop up on screen. So while they're still talking, you could start reading through what you would respond with next, making the conversations feel very fluid and connected. Or there was an option to simply see your chat history, so you could scroll back on some of your previous responses and how the NPC responded. When taking a weapon out of a container, you have the option to just scrap that weapon and have the scrap deposited in your inventory rather than breaking that up into 2 to 3 steps as a lot of other games do. Those are just a couple of the examples, but if you are someone who is worried about the Outer Worlds not being bug-free on release, I have zero concerns around that. At least the segments of this game that I played, and granted I was restricted to just this one planet, so maybe this is the polished planet, but based off what I saw, it certainly feels like a very good experience and something that is basically release worthy. Another thing that I know a lot of people probably have quite a few questions about are the weapons in this game and really the items and armors overall. So gunplay is something that I've seen actually getting quite a bit of critique in some of the gameplay, but playing it and using the system for myself, I actually really like it. The guns themselves were fine. The game uses a leveled system and has different ammo types for different types of guns, although it seems fairly simple. Like you just have heavy ammo, shotgun ammo, light ammo. You can apply certain weapon mods, and the guns are made by different companies, so they have different pros and cons associated with them. But when it comes to that, I didn't really have enough time to really research it, especially considering so many of the weapons I just had given to this character, so I didn't know the pros and cons as well. I was just kind of using what I found and what I had. But one of the things that immediately really stood out to me is actually the weapon sound. The weapons in this game sound great, which was kind of surprising. It honestly, to me, sounds better than even some other FPS-focused games. And even outside of that, the gunplay felt fluid. If you played Fallout 4 and the combat overhauls we saw with this game, I would actually put the Outer Worlds combat as slightly better than that. In the Outer Worlds, by default, you get this thing called tactical time dilation. It's very useful, and you'll probably use it all the time. It gives you a little breakdown of your enemies, but actually after a certain point of leveling up some of the combat-focused skills, you'll also get positional damage on enemies. This system was awesome, and I personally really focused around using this, and I think it really improved the combat overall. Stalling time, now you have the option to do various things, whether it be shoot the enemy in the heart and get an instant kill shot, shoot them in the head and temporarily blind them, try and shoot their hands and make it so they can't hit you. There were several options here, and it gave you quite a bit of variety in combat with what approach you wanted to take. You didn't just have to kill everyone instantly, you could just maim everyone instantly. Several weapons actually also had secondary attacks, which added an interesting twist to them. And this is definitely one of those games where you could have fun just kind of quick saving real quick and then shooting a bunch of NPCs to see what happens and getting into little mini wars. Although based on my experience thus far, I don't feel like I could totally grasp the depth of this system. All the various weapons again had a certain brand associated with it, which carries different weights, although I don't really understand how. Apparently some are more moddable, some take longer to break, but I didn't really get to see that again. There are weapon and armor mods. You have to go to a crafting table to do this. I found one in just one of the towns I was exploring in and did a little bit of it, but again, I didn't really dive into that system. As far as the armors go, you could definitely tell when certain enemies were wearing armor because they took a lot more damage. There are a variety of damage types, although again, I didn't really get to explore this system. I wouldn't be surprised if using the right damage type would have played a significant role in how quickly I could take down certain enemies. I find a lot of items during this gameplay, a lot of which I didn't really know what they were. A lot of them apparently were junk related, and actually when you go to a vendor, you have the option to just sell all of your junk. But speaking broadly, the combat in this game was fun, although kind of easy. I never really struggled all that much, and I only died once when I just went guns blazing on an entire town while wide in the open. Although everything we're seeing in the background is actually on normal difficulty, so perhaps on harder difficulties it's a bit more difficult. But moving on from combat, one thing that definitely did stick out to me was companions. Companions, both in combat and out of combat, actually play a pretty large role. Whether you're in various conversations or just going from town to town, oftentimes your companions will have something to say. The two companions I had would talk amongst themselves, and even further, sometimes some of the NPCs I knew would be like, oh hey, I know your companion, and just immediately start talking to my companion rather than me. Sometimes your companion would shed a little bit of light on the culture of a certain town. Companions in this game have special abilities that they can use. These were really powerful in combat and a good way to take down a lot of enemies quickly. Just in general, it seems like they actually were a formidable force in PvE encounters. And these things come off of cooldown really quickly. I found that I had to consistently remind myself to use it as it was almost always up and available. And also companions in this have quests. Pretty early on, one of your companions reaches out to you about doing her quest, although I never actually do it during my session. I'm sure others did though, so the gameplay is definitely out there. And speaking of some of those quality of life features, actually managing your companion's inventory or stats is way nicer in the Outer Worlds, because it's just an extension of your own inventory. You don't have to talk to them and go through a couple of menus, you just open your own menu and then scroll over a couple of times. But one thing that was kind of weird and honestly a little surprising to me, if you try and talk to your companions outside of them having something to say, there really isn't anything there. It's like you're talking to one of those random NPC guards in a major town. They give you one generic line, but then kind of move on until they have something to actually say again. But just speaking overall, the companions in this seemed interesting and also like they were pretty powerful. Again, we weren't a character spec'd out to leadership, so I'd be curious to see how this is different if you're not spec'd out to leadership. But compared at least to Fallout 4, the Outer Worlds felt like a game where you would want companions quite a bit more often than in other games. One of the only things that actually stood out to me as almost a little bit of a downside was the world of the Outer Worlds. As I mentioned before, it looked cool. A lot of the creatures seemed interesting. Sometimes you would actually find these marauders. They were raider type people. There's different types of them, different levels among them. They had tamed dogs as well as these big robots that would actually come and fly and attack you. That was pretty cool. But at least on Monarch, where we were playing, things were pretty desolate. Going from town to town, there wasn't a ton going on. There was the occasional random encounter. I met this one lady, saved her from marauders, and she actually set up this little shop somewhere. But just in general, I wouldn't say the world was one of the most interesting parts. This again, partly probably because we're on Monarch, the non-terraformed planet. I'd be very curious to see how different this is on a a town-filled planet, but I didn't get to see that one, and based off my impressions on Monarch, it certainly did have interesting spots, but there was also a lot of not so interesting spots, and just in general, it didn't really feel like a massive open landscape that you could explore endlessly. And a lot of times, if you went to some of the edges, there really just wasn't a lot going on. There definitely wasn't nearly as much environmental storytelling as you would find in something like a Fallout. But I keep mentioning Fallout, and actually comparing this to Fallout, I would say overall, this feels almost like an upgraded Fallout New Vegas. Even though the world wasn't quite the same with just being one blanket open world, as far as the actual in-game systems go, the dialogue, the looting, the hacking, lockpicking, questing, all of that, it felt very Fallout, but like a refined Fallout. Like Obsidian actually made a Fallout, learned from some of their mistakes with that game, and improved on several of these systems. This felt good. After I played the game for roughly 2 hours, I wanted to play more. And now a couple of weeks later, I still want to play more. I want to gain access to that original planet where all the towns are and get to experience some of the quests and NPCs on that one. And after actually getting to play this game for those 2 hours, I am way more excited about its eventual release. I still do have some reservations or concerns about the size of the game, how long of a story it'll actually be, how fleshed out certain components of the world are, but even if it is a little bit of a shorter experience, based off what I saw, it definitely felt like there is replayability from those choices, or even how you build your character. And honestly, after playing this game for 2 hours or so, the only real concern I have is in what we didn't see. I saw a snippet of a much larger experience, and based off that snippet, the much larger experience seems awesome, but of course there is the potential it isn't. Maybe certain systems are a lot more shallow or simple than I think. Maybe the dialogue with the Iconlast faction is some of the best dialogue in the game, and that's why it really stood out to me. I don't particularly think that, and I think the fact that the only thing I'm really concerned about is some of the stuff I don't know, but at the same time I still do have that part of me that's like, well, I didn't see what is kind of seemingly going to be the main world of the Outer Worlds, and then asking myself, why didn't I see the main world? We know it's going to be a bit more linear, we've seen some minor gameplay of it in the past, and honestly I think it could realistically just be that they're saving that for the eventual release because that's where a lot of the story happens. I didn't talk a ton about perks and leveling up because I only leveled up once and I didn't pick really any of the perks or skills my character had, but based off what I saw just briefly going over it, it looks like there's a lot of options there, a lot of different ways to kit out your character. So yeah, the Outer Worlds feels like a genuinely good game, a polished game or a fine game, and a game to really look forward to. It felt good on the combat side, it felt good on the dialogue side, and the story overall started to really suck me in, even just after an hour and 15 minutes or so of playing it. So those are my impressions, but one of the beauties of this impression video is you could just go watch my gameplay. It's going to pop up at the end of this video, or you can just look on my channel in general or click in the little eye. Watch it for yourself. See what you think of the game. This is what I thought, but I'd definitely be curious to hear what you guys think in the comments down below. Are you more excited for this game now? Less excited? How do you feel about it? Either way, that's pretty much going to wrap it up for this one. As always, again, I thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed, and I hope to see you all next time. Later.